All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to WatchThis with RickRamos. As always, this is your host, RickRamos. I'm coming to you here from beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. As always, my co-host, Mr. Ibrahim Chavez, coming to you from Los Angeles. We're excited to be continuing this month of November and digging into a series of films that maybe don't get the attention that they deserve. We talked a little bit about, I did an episode on Hard Times. We talked Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon. Last week, we got into Sean Penn's The Pledge, and this week we get into, I don't know if I would call it a little seen Kurosawa classic, but in the world of Kurosawa films, you think, of course, Seven Samurai. You think Throne of Blood. You think Rashomon. You think Yojimbo. You think the samurai films. It's rare that podcasts such as this or any kind of real critical analysis is dedicated on a popular on a popular platform. It's rare that critical analysis is directed towards his 1963 police procedural High and Low, which for me, setting aside the brilliance of Seven Samurai, because that's your go-to when it comes to the talent of Akira Kurosawa, this is probably my favorite of his films, and it's a film that I think it's why it sits at this place in my heart is because it is so different from the standard of what he is known for. It is so different from that world of samurai culture. It's a contemporary film, or at least contemporary to 1963 when it was made. And I think there's a lot in it about the culture of Japan almost 20 years after the war, the emergence of the Japanese economic system, as well as a very human story about choices that need to be made and the violence of men, the integrity of men, and the difficulty in sacrifice. So this is a film that I've been sitting with for about, I think I saw it 25, maybe 30 years ago. I've seen it a couple of times in theaters, and it was a thrill to sit down and watch it again this past weekend. Now, my co-host, partner, Mr. Chavez, I believe we talked a little bit, and you said you had never seen this film, but you had heard of it. You were from... What is your relationship with the film? I guess we'll go to the standard question that I ask you. What is your relationship to this film?
Okay. First, before I get into that, just some housekeeping. Jorge Salcedo, Mr. Burroughs, thank you for your contributions.
Oh, yeah. Jorge Salcedo, Mr. Burroughs, yes.
There are others. If we haven't mentioned your name yet, we'll give you the shout-outs to come. Keep listening. Mm-hmm. They're coming.
And if you want a shout-out, send some money. So there's also that.
That's the ransom, motherfuckers. My relationship to the film. So I'm watching this movie. I had never seen it.
Yeah.
I had heard of it. So I'm watching this movie. And as has been happening lately, I'm like, have I seen this movie?
Wow, really? Okay.
And I'm like, no, I've never fucking seen this movie. I've never seen this movie. But this story, but I know this premise. I is it just because it's just something that, I mean, it's a spoiler fucking alert. I already made that joke. It's a kid gets kidnapped, held for ransom. But there's a twist. I'm like, no, I know this fucking story. So I watched the movie. Then I'm I look it up so I can see, all right, what year was it made, blah, blah. And then I see it, that it was based on a late 50s
Mm-hmm.
Ed McBain book.
Yeah.
And I say, I read this fucking book.
Oh, okay. You've read the book. I thought you were going to say you saw Ron Howard's Ransom or something like that, or there was another
No,
film
I
that.
don't even know about that.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know about I didn't know that Ron Howard had done a version of this. Um,
It's a very
no,
similar story.
in the late 90s, I was in high school, I read a book called Vespers, some author named Ed McBain. It
Mm-hmm.
was a cop book. And I read it, because it had to do with Catholicism and Satanism, but it was this like cop crime story. So I read it, and then I started reading more of his books, and I read a whole bunch of them. And I think probably years passed, and I think I started reading it more. But it was these bouts of reading of Ed McBain's shit. It would be like kind of like little binges.
Yeah.
So the problem with that is that the Vespers book is the first one is the one that I think I've read it twice at this point. I remember the most. The other ones are all kind of blurred because I remember one of the main like detectives. I remember, I think his wife, if I remember correctly, maybe his wife is deaf. But it's kind of like this blending of shit of plots. But coming back to this movie, I realized that there was a little grain of story there in my brain that I was reminded of watching this movie, and I couldn't connect the source
Mm-hmm.
of that grain until I went and checked, and I'm saying, okay, what year was this made? Okay, Ed McBain, that's it. So it was new, but it wasn't new.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a new way of telling of it. It was me actually seeing it. So now I'm kind of curious to go back and reread it.
Well, I'm interested in Ed McBain. Ed McBain was a writer. Was a pseudonym for a writer named Evan Hunter, I believe, and he was. I don't know if he was a cop. I don't know if he lived in that world, but he wrote a series of. I think the series was called the 86th Precinct series or something like that.
87th,
87th. Okay.
87th.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
pretty fucking close. 87th Precinct, and it
just
was
one
about.
off.
You know, it was a study of police work, and I think you could argue that it would influence most of the cop stuff that would come out years later, including Milch's NYPD Blue, or Bochco and Milch's Hill Street Blues, and all these different types of stories. These serialized, continuing series where you met these detectives, you met these technicians, the morgue guy, maybe the bartenders that they drank with, their bookies, this all this shit, and the criminal underworld, and a lot of that you see in Kurosawa's movie. I think what stands out for me in Kurosawa's film is that it's so different from everything else that he's done. Now, Kurosawa, as we've talked, and I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, he's known mostly for the samurai films. He's known for Yojimbo, remade as Fistful of Dollars, Seven Samurai remade as Magnificent Seven, among other remakes or loosely based remakes. Hidden Fortress remade as Star Wars, or at least not necessarily remade, but
Influence, yeah.
highly influential in George Lucas's space opera. Um, and here you have something where you take this unnamed American city that a lot of people relate to, Manhattan, and you delve into the world of American crime, the underworld, the snitches, the rats, the the prostitutes, pimps, the detectives, the beat cops, the captains, the sergeants, all of that, and then you transport it to 1960s Tokyo and the emergence of this business culture that would, as the decades continued, would become a formidable presence in the world. Whatever you want to say about Japan, the incredible military strength during the 1940s, and then an incredible economic force in the 1980s. And there's something in that world that lends itself to a great storytelling setting. And here you have the story of an executive at a shoe manufacturing company, National Shoes, who, as the film opens up, you're seeing a meeting of a group of people who are plotting a takeover of that company. And it's interesting because it's three assholes who are, without question, the bad guys in this story. But Mifune, in all of his charm, but not an underplayed. I mean, charm oozes out of the man without him playing on it. Mifune is a formidable presence. There is a reason that he is the star that he is. There is a reason that these films continue to enthrall audiences 50, 60, 70 years later, that we continue to watch these films and watch him in particular. And we're going to get into the power of Mifune in this film because it's much different from the Kikuchiyo character in Seven Samurai or the Yojimbo character in Yojimbo and the sequel Sanjuro. He is a tough and difficult man, but there's also a professionalism and a certain nobility in the character that makes you not necessarily sympathize with him in the beginning, but he definitely wins you over and you side with him. You know, cinema is really interesting because it's where you point the camera. Where you point the camera is what the director wants you to focus on, obviously. But the mere fact of pointing the camera at that direction, in that direction, and focusing on a thing, I think it has a psychological effect on us, the viewer, the audience, in drawing us into this world and forcing the hand forcing the hand on who we are going to sympathize with and who we are going to champion. And I think that's more apparent in this film than in any of the other Kurosawa and Mifune collaborations. Because I think there was something like 12 or 13, and this would be the second to last film that they would do together.
Mm-hmm.
Culminating with Redbeard, which is an even smaller Mifune role. It's very strange because you go back to these films and this film opens with Mifune. You go 53 minutes of this parlor story basically that is set up like a play almost, and is shot in that way.
To say about that.
Yeah, and it's shot in extreme widescreen, 2.35:1, maybe wider than that. It's shot with two cameras, so they are long takes. So what ends up happening, if you know about film, a camera at this time in '63 and for the majority of time until digital came along, a camera would hold a magazine, a 10-minute magazine. So they would shoot these scenes for the length of the magazine or whatever the magazine would hold. And Kurosawa, in this particular instance, I don't know if this is the first time he did it, but this is definitely, this probably is the first time that he did it. He shot with two cameras, extended takes that he would then cut together to form the narrative. Now, there are certain filmmakers who feel that that is not real directing. I think Peckinpah was one. Peckinpah's attitude was, you shoot what you know you're going to use. So instead of shooting thousands and thousands and thousands of feet of film, you shot what you needed because you knew that that's what, in your head, you had already shot the film and cut the film. So it was a matter of, that was real directing.
Okay.
There's some argument there. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
it's
there is validity to that argument. I don't particularly agree with that argument, but I see the validity of it. I see why you could call what he's doing lazy, in a sense. But I think there's a bigger picture when you have somebody of Kurosawa's talent who is able to do these long takes. Number one, the camera is further back. The actors don't know what their close-up is. They don't know what they're shooting. They just know that they have to hit their marks.
You're just getting more coverage. That's all it is.
You're getting more coverage, but it's more than just that, because it gives an actor a certain level of freedom of not worrying about me being in the close-up. What it basically says is,
yeah, I mean, they're
I'm
covered
giving more.
physically, like, yeah,
Mhm.
it opens up the space for them for their marks, right?
Yes, it opens that up, but it also says I have to trust my director implicitly. I have to understand that my director is going to take care of this and he's going to position me in the right way. What I have to work on now is hitting the mark and hitting both the mark and the emotion necessary to sell the scene. And that's what you see here. Kurosawa keeps Mifune. He makes him the main focus of everything in these shots, while at the same time alluding to other things going on. There are three executives sitting around him. Mifune is sitting at the head of them. Sometimes you're seeing him from behind, which is a powerful image. I think that's how you first see him. You see these three men who have come to speak to him, who are basically trying to get him to throw in with them in order to oust the old man, the boss of the company, a character that you never see. And then Kurosawa reveals Mifune, and you see a Mifune that's much different than anything that we've seen in the past. Yojimbo, Seven Samurai, he's roguish. He's tough. He's somewhat dirty, unkempt. Hair is, he is the epitome of style and grace. He's in a white cardigan sweater. He's in slacks. His hair is perfectly coiffed. He has this mustache. He looks like what you imagine an executive of 1963 would be. He's exactly what you imagine that world is. It's a much different Mifune than anything else that he had done, including the cop roles in Drunken Angel. No, the Drunken Angel role was a gangster. Stray Dog, he was a cop. He played an 80-year-old man in I Live in Fear. Mifune had an incredible range. But this is the film that made him... I think this is a film that really did wonders as far as humanizing the character. Because humanizing the character that Mifune would be, because in those other films he was more superhuman. If you look at, he's comical he's comical in Seven Samurai. He's there for comic relief in a lot of ways, but he's also the heart of the film. Yojimbo, he's a badass. He's everything that Clint Eastwood would eventually turn into global stardom. That was the seed for that. But in this film, there's something very natural. There's something very real while at the same time being formidable. Um, I really love that part. I love his performance, even though it's very brief in the bigger picture of the film. And I gotta admit, the first time that I saw the film, I was really upset that there wasn't more of him.
Mm.
On subsequent viewings, I really started to embrace what it was that Kurosawa was doing. Because he takes it out of his world in his hands, and then he starts to deal with the kidnapping. The story, to just get into it, he's an executive at a shoe company. The board of directors are trying to pull him into a scheme in order to oust the head of the shoe company. But he has his own plans to do the same thing. But there's a nobility there because he wants to create a good product that he can feel a pride in making. Whereas these other executives, they want to cut cost, they want to sell a higher price shoe at a lower cost of a cheaper shoe at a higher cost, believing that with marketing they could convince the public to buy it, which probably would have worked. But there is a level of deceit in that the Gondo character, Kingo Gondo is his name, refuses to be a part of. As he is planning and as he is as he is carrying out his personal takeover, leveraging everything that he has, mortgaging his home, going to Yakuza to borrow money in an attempt to gain control of the company. It's at that moment where he believes that his son is kidnapped. Now that could have been a straight out dilemma story, a father's love for his son and what he was willing to do to sacrifice anything. But Kurosawa, based on Ed McBain's story, takes it in a different direction so that it becomes more complex. The kidnappers mistake the chauffeur's son for his son, kidnap that boy, and now Gondo has to decide whether or not he's willing to sacrifice his wealth and his future, the future of his family, the integrity of the business, all of that to save the chauffeur's son. And the tension and the inner struggle is beautifully realized in that first 53 minutes. I think that first 53 minutes is one of the best things ever shot. I think it's a great. That alone is a great film. It's a lot like the beginning of Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, a perfect film in and of itself. That's not to say that the second part, the actual police procedural, stumbles or drops the ball in any way. But it's a somewhat different picture at that point when the focus shifts to Tatsuya Nakadai as the lead inspector and the kidnapper, who is, I think, a really well developed character without giving a lot of the character that
motivation.
Well, it's there in the motivation is there in the taunting phone calls, you know, but it's never like, it would have been real easy to give him a moment where he's this fucking guy and his wealth, and he does this and he does that. There could have been a shot of him in a bar talking, and that's what a lot of people would have done. A lot of directors of lesser. But Kurosawa allows the story to be the driving point. And this actor, what's his name?
I don't know who he is.
I can't remember. I think he plays, I can't be sure, but I think he plays the young doctor in Redbeard. But I'm not sure. But he does a lot with very little. In a weird way, there's a part of you that starts to sympathize with him to a certain degree, because you start to understand the haves and the have-nots. This film in English is called High and Low. In Japanese, It's called Tengoku to Jigoku, Heaven and Hell, which is a heavier. It's a heavier title. It's a much. I prefer High and Low, but I think it's a more telling title.
Well,
Heaven
I
and
think it's
Hell.
also. I think also for a Western audience to hear Heaven and Hell, I think maybe is like it raises the question, like, okay, that's where you ended up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of put it side by side with High and Low, and you look at the kind of the economic, the fuzziness of the motivation, because you have in the epilogue, you have the motivation. You understand that it's envy, you understand that, but you don't really understand, like, there's no one source, there's no one story that it's like, well, like you say, he never says, 1 year my dad didn't come home because he worked at a factory, blah, blah, right?
Yeah.
It's never that one thing. But Heaven and Hell is, rather than looking at it as like, where did you end up? It's look at it as, well, what were you born into?
Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah.
Because you can be born into heaven and you can be born into hell. It's an interesting, you talk about like where does he point the camera? And even before that, it's like, well, where does the script point the camera?
Yeah.
Because it's like you're gonna get a hero. Or at the very least, you're gonna get a protagonist. The person doesn't have to be heroic, or so-called hero. And that protagonist is gonna have a problem. The problem is, I've mortgaged fucking everything. I have this plan. There's, Act 1, there's this takeover happening. But then you get the kidnapping and the ransom. And Act 1 is a very different film, as you described. Act 2, what is it? It's the payoff and the investigation, the procedure. Act 3, it's the chase and the epilogue.
Yeah.
I'm watching this movie, and it got me thinking about, it reminded me a lot of, Robert McKee, the script guru. It got me thinking about types of narrative media, and it got me thinking about kind of some of the stuff that he's talked about in terms of like, well, what Chuck Palahniuk has kind of talked about this too, in terms of like, if you're writing a book, you should do things in the book that only books can do.
Mm-hmm.
And the question of like, okay, let's look at these different. I'm watching this, thinking this, and then I rewatched that the different portions of the film because was looking at it and I'm saying, what's Kurosawa gonna do? Because this, as you described, it's like a stage play on film. And if it's a stage play on film, and we've already seen, most of us, I think, have already seen the stuff that Kurosawa is like really well known for multiple times. And we've seen the remakes. I mean,
Well, that's an important thing. It's the original, the remakes, and then everything that was influenced by it.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't, if you know movies at all, regardless of whether or not you've actually sat down to watch 3.5 hours of Seven Samurai, you've seen that film. You've seen it in countless television episodes. You've seen it in countless other movies from that time, from now, from just in the past. You've read it in books. It's the assembly of, I mean, shit. Marvel's The Avengers, to a degree, is Seven Samurai. The assembling of a group, you know?
The A-team. It's getting these guys together. You've talked about this.
Yeah.
So it's getting me to ask the question, well, what's the point of making a film of this? And I'm looking and I'm seeing, I don't know anything of that. I don't know that he's using two cameras. I don't know. All I know is that I'm seeing what's happening and I'm approaching it, looking at media, and also with the question of like, what does Kurosawa have up his sleeve? Because I know something's coming. Stylistically, I know something's coming. It's intuitively I know, but I don't know what it is consciously, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, if you go through these, what are the strengths of the different types of narrative media? Novel, okay. A novel you can express, you can create worlds, blah, 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 but you can really express inner thoughts. This is something that you can't do in the same way with other types of media. You can do a soliloquy on stage, but you need the audience there. The reader can actually get into the mind in a novel. On stage, what is a stage play? What are its strengths? It's the relationship dynamics, dialogue in a small space, using that conflict between the kitchen table conflict, right? Opera, more pageantry, emotion with music as the, leading into the musical later. TV, you get small hits, and I'm talking about TV not as we know it now, but as it was, small hits of drama and comedy.
Are you talking about the early days of Playhouse 97 and the Sidney Lumet directed television, Julius Caesar and the early...
Not streaming, not what it's become. Long form TV, what we have now, a deeper drawing out of plot and character development. So you can get fucking Sopranos, you can get Game of Thrones, and you can see, and they can really, really stretch out what each person is where they're gonna end up on an episodic level. Film, obviously visual poetry, vistas, environments. You can get epic spans of history, but different from what TV has become, because TV has become, we've talked about this.
Well, TV is supplanted cinema at this point, yeah.
It's the new cinema, whereas films are trending towards big spectacle.
Yeah.
In film, you can create an immersive environment that's visual and sonic, which is something that a novel can't do. A novel, it's all happening in your mind, obviously. You can do Ran, you can do the Seven Samurai and all that. So I'm thinking, like, if it's creating a visual representation of a story, but not in a way that can't be done on stage or on the small screen, what's he gonna do? Because this is Kurosawa.
Yeah. Well, the expectations are higher, and I think justifiably. I mean, you don't go into a Spielberg film expecting to. If Spielberg gives you something on par to um, just a fucking, who's that asshole? Michael Bean. Not Michael Bean. Michael Bay. You're gonna
Right.
say, "What the fuck was that?" You
You'll have
you
elements of it, and
yeah, because a lot
but
of
it's
what
not
Bay
going to be
does
the,
is going to be reflective of that. But what I mean is that there comes a certain type of expectation, a justifiable expectation for the brilliance of a certain filmmaker. We were talking a little bit before we got on the mic about David Fincher's new movie.
Mhm.
We talked about that. We talked about Christopher Nolan's Tenet. Being somewhat disappointed by some of the films that these people do because we know what they're capable of. We know of the brilliance. Now, you can say that about Kurosawa too. Some of the, Scandal is not a very interesting film. The Quiet Duel is not all that good. Um, but then there are smaller films that really knock it out. No Regrets for Our Youth is really a beautiful film of Kurosawa's that focuses on a female protagonist, something that he never really did. Um, the point is that with something like, I get what you're saying here with, especially on a friend, and it's hard for me to imagine because it's been so long since this was a first time viewing, but I see where you're watching a Kurosawa and you're saying, what, I know what this man is capable of doing. I know what this man has done. This man has shocked and surprised me and has made me feel like that there is, and I'm not saying just you, I'm saying this is about me as well. And I'm speaking in a very generalized voice right now. This is somebody who has dictated the language of cinema to a degree and has shown you that cinema can be truly art.
of course,
You
yeah.
know, when you talk about, when people challenge Martin Scorsese on his attitude about Marvel films and big tentpole cinema, the point that they're missing is not that those films are inherently bad, but that film has the potential to be so much more than merely entertainment.
Yeah. Hmm.
Kurosawa would say a film has an obligation to entertain, which I know you don't necessarily agree with, but I do. Um, but
Well, I
entertain.
mean,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I think no, I think you're probably about to step on that stone. Is like it's well, I'm kicking it out the leg out from under you.
Yeah.
It's I think there are different ways of looking at entertain. It's like,
Yes.
well,
Well,
at
that's
least
that's
because
the
it's
point that I was going to move into.
yeah,
Yes.
that's what I yeah.
Yes.
Because it's look like you can go the you can we can I mentioned Robert McKee. We can say, well, he's going to tell you that a film needs a story
Yeah.
and a story has a structure. And regardless of what anyone, even art house cinema, is an acknowledgement of that structure a turning your back on it, um, but having some kind of knowledge of it.
Yeah.
Um, Peter Greenaway is going to say, um, you don't need a textual based cinema, but you can still have structure. You
Yeah.
can still have sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you can also have color coding. You can also have all of these other codes that are built into the art form that stimulate you in a visual way.
Yeah.
And you'll derive story from that. So entertainment can be, it's, the point is that it's supposed to stimulate you. It's supposed to get you going somehow.
And I think that's where you and I come into agreement with entertainment is entertainment itself. The word entertainment has this widely embraced definition. And last week we talked about Sean Penn's The Pledge, and I mentioned Tim Roth's The War Zone in that conversation. Neither of those films entertained me in the traditional sense of entertainment. But there was a sense of entertainment in knowing technique, brilliance of storytelling, being drawn into to stories and wondering what's going to happen next. But also, and this I'm very big on, there is a major chance that I'm going to be disappointed in how this ends from a human aspect, not necessarily a narrative aspect. Both of those films
Right.
really disappointed me in what human beings were capable of, but they hit the point that they were making, and they were beautifully realized because they were so honest and truthful to real life, which is something you don't
Well,
see in movies that often.
there's a lot there. It's like we talk about entertainment versus stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go into. I'm big on, and I keep using this as an example because it's an easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Someone like a Tarkovsky,
okay,
or someone like a
Bellatar. Okay.
These people can also stimulate you with boredom.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they're doing is they are using cinema to make a statement, which
mm-hmm.
is a view of reality for them, a world view. And the world view, they're using cinema at that point as not only a mouthpiece, but also as a weapon. And they're extreme. They're also more considered like art house. And going back to Robert McKee, I think it's him who makes it an interesting distinction that I don't know if we've really articulated this, but we should keep this in mind. There is an inclination in American cinema, in particular, and in American narrative, that leans towards a worldview that involves a character and an expectation that a character should change, and the character can change his or her or their circumstances
mm-hmm.
from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. And that doesn't mean that the film has to end on a happy note. It just means that there is some form of change, meaning that the world can change, but also that there's some hope that we as individuals can influence our situation in the world. There are other views of cinema that are not American that maybe you'll find in Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, other parts of Europe, Africa, whatever, that are going to lean towards a view of the world as indifferent to one's hopes and dreams and ambitions. Sameness, this idea of there's a sameness to the world, and each individual is not necessarily a hero in their own story. You may have a slice of life. You don't always have this huge arc where it's like fucking Michael Corleone is a veteran, and then he doesn't want to be like his family, to all the way at the end, spoiler alert, he becomes worse than what he didn't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes the worst of that, to the point that now it's not the father like, oh, the most important thing is the family, to where now he's like, his family is dying around him for various reasons, all the way up until the piece of shit that was the third film. There are a lot of different ways to look at cinema and narrative. So to get us back here, I'm looking at this stage play, and I'm looking at the choices that Kurosawa is making. And initially, I'm feeling it more than seeing it. I'm feeling that something's going to happen, but I'm waiting for it to happen. And I feel that it's coming, and I think it was filtered through kind of this theoretical lens, as a metaphor, that's saying initially, why is he filming this the way he's filming it? This could have been a play. This could have been on TV. Wait a minute, he's not filming it the way it would have been on TV. It's not obviously a camera mounted in the back of a theater, because it's not flat like that. Something's going to happen. I'm uncomfortable. Why am I uncomfortable? Well, I'm uncomfortable because the fucking character is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable because the situation is uncomfortable. Why are we stuck in this fucking room? What's going to happen to the kid? Is the killer going to get the kid? And you start to get this merging of like mental chatter that I'm having about cinema with an emotional reaction of empathy towards a character. And it's Kurosawa using that first act, that situation, that space to create a sense of claustrophobia. It's all in one room. Do we open the drapes or not? Do we close them so they can't see inside? What's happening? So by the time you get to the train, now there's movement. I can breathe. There's literal movement of the camera, the way everything's happening, the cutting is happening, the movie picks up. Mm-hmm. Things are now happening in the narrative itself. He's using the way he's filming as a parallel to what's happening in the story. So you have these tight shots, you have this interesting also irony, in that we talk about the shallowness of action, or that gets talked about. But the ironic thing is that action is one of those things that on that level can only happen in cinema. And if it's done with a masterful hand, and that's the thing, if it's done with a masterful hand, it can lead to something that's truly profound.
Absolutely.
So it was interesting for me to watch this this film, because I had this whole fucking like mental process on one end, emotional process on the other end, and then they converge on strangers on a train. So then by the time we get into the procedural, I'm just engrossed, because it was a total change of pace. And then by the time you get to the third act, where they're actually following the guy around, and now you're in this whatever Japanese, I don't know if you said Tokyo, I don't know if it's Tokyo or not, but
it's Yokohama, I think.
You see shots of this guy walking through this alley. Mm-hmm. You see this, and then you see that shooting gallery junkie, I mean dope fiend, heroin using back street that looks it looks like a horror film, because they look like zombies. And there are equivalents of that in every major city. It was literally like a journey, from this guy's house up on the hill, mm-hmm. down to the lowest of the low, high and low.
Yeah,
it literally takes you there,
and that's why I think it's a better title. Yeah, it's really interesting that you said you called the stage play at the beginning, the first 53 minutes in that house, you call that claustrophobic. That is so open. There's so
Well,
much
this is the
space. No,
thing.
no, no. I know what I know.
I felt,
Yeah, go ahead.
but I felt that I think without being able to articulate it, I felt it almost like it's breathing. I felt it like
Mm-hmm.
I felt a sense of claustrophobia, but in a wide space, like a stage.
And I think
But it's
what that is, because I've
I
seen.
wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was gonna open up at any moment, but it wasn't until it did.
For me, watching it, and I've seen it about, I think I've seen this movie about 7 or 8 times from beginning to end, and then I've watched, segments of it here and there. I think that there's something about what Kurosawa's brilliance. I would have shot this in 1.85, and I would have made it more claustrophobic. But that's exactly the opposite of what he does. He expands the space. He gives you he goes about as wide as you can. In a weird way, this is what Tarantino attempted with.
I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah,
The cowboy film.
this is the Hateful Eight, which is it's a he had a great cinematographer on. I think he had Richard Deakins on that. Roger Deakins. I think he had Roger Deakins on that film. And that did not work because it didn't accentuate the claustrophobia. This accentuates the claustrophobia because as you slowly start to realize that Mifune, Gondo, has set himself up in this world. He has moved up. He is a self-made man. He has moved up, or at least to the degree that you can be when you're building your empire on your wife's dowry, which is something that's mentioned in the story. A lot of this shit. I've watched this movie a lot of times. He has built this castle that now is almost like a prison to him. It's a prison of luxury, because just outside is hell. It is the low. And when you go down into that world and you see where the kidnapper lives, that's the true claustrophobia of everything being on top of everything else, of the pollution, of Kurosawa introduces that character as the cops are walking through the neighborhood, recognizing and complaining about the heat, and that's the first mention of looking up at that house, and it really starts to get to you. Then you see the reflection of the kidnapper in that cesspool of water, which is a very Kurosawa has used that in the past. He's used it in Drunken Angel. He's used it in Ikiru, 2 great films that he did examining poverty and purpose in life. If you haven't seen either of those 2 films, I suggest start with Drunken Angel, beautiful film, very early Kurosawa, and Ikiru, a masterpiece to those who have seen it, and a very touching, moving, emotional film that really, if you watch it and you're open to the emotions of it, you'll be incredibly moved. But that shot, that polluted water, and you see, that's the first image that you see of the kidnapper, and he's coming out of that. It says a lot. It's very metaphorical. It's a beautiful introduction to a character that we are going to hate. But if you have any level of empathy at all, you understand why he is the way he is. You understand, not to excuse his actions, not to excuse what he does in the film, but there is a sense of the haves and the have-nots, and how you can eventually be pushed to the point of just hatred because of it. I understand this character. I've been this character. This character is to a degree Travis Bickle. This character is to a degree um, everybody who has worked a 40, 50-hour work week only to come home and have nothing to show for it. This is the reality of the world that we live in. The fact that Mifune plays such a noble character, he might be an asshole, but he is a principled man, is what makes him. It makes this film a lot more layered than it would necessarily have been.
Because he has.
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that the Kingo Gondo character is not saintly in any way, but he does have a code.
Struggle with it.
Yeah, he has to struggle with it, but it's strange because a lot of people would say, well, it's a little boy. He should save that little boy. But should he save that little boy at the sacrifice of his family?
Well, I mean, yeah, he should save that little boy. Does not a story make.
No. But it doesn't make a story, but in real life.
The movie's over.
No, the movie. Yeah, but in real life, fuck the kid, and the movie's over. But
it's not going to happen. Either, in real life also, there's going to be a back and forth.
Yeah.
It's not that simple. People will say, yeah, you should do that with your money. But there's going to be that back and forth, and that back and forth that happens in one's mind is going to be represented by the different characters in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have the fucking sleazeball guy who worked for him, his second in command, who's going behind his back, and it's all adding to that tension. It was interesting for me to see this movie, because it was, you watch enough movies.
Yeah,
we talked about this too.
Yeah,
you get a sense of like, okay, I get it. I've seen this. Aside from the have I seen this or haven't I seen this that we also run into.
Yeah.
But when you have a different kind of touch for every segment of the film, but they all work together. By the time you get to that dancing scene, and that dancing scene is packed.
Yeah.
But it seems like it has so much space and literally movement, and it looks like there's a current flowing through it, versus the beginning, which is like there aren't that many people in that space, but that shit feels like its own level of a stagnant puddle.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious to see new Kurosawa stuff just to get that hit.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like it's the classics with Kurosawa.
Well, the ones that people speak of when they talk about Kurosawa, and I'm not diminishing anybody's take on him. I think if you're watching him, there's a certain level of appreciation for cinema. If you're drawn to Kurosawa, Mizoguchi, especially Ozu, then you are a true cinema person. That's my personal opinion on that. Yes. But there tends to be a lean towards Yojimbo, Sanjuro, Seven Samurai, Ron.
Maybe Ron. Maybe Throne of Blood. I don't hear that one as often.
Not as much, but what I'm talking about are the action spectacles, the violence, the samurai movies. Yes, when you start going into the contemporary films, when you go into Drunken Angel, Stray Dog, contemporary Japan after the war, post-war Japan, where Japan is finding its identity, where Japan is struggling to establish itself, rebuild itself, and find an identity. You got to remember, this is a country that for years prayed to an emperor that they believed was a god. Now, I'm sure the entire country didn't believe that, but enough of the country did that led them into a world war. And, there was all this talk of the Japanese will never surrender, and you'll see mass suicides and that kind of. I mean, there was a very real mania there that made you wonder about the culture. So to no longer have the emperor in his position, you're really looking at a Japan that is in flux and finding itself and finding its legs and figuring out what it needs to be. And with high and low, what you're seeing is the emergence of a business culture that would one day be one of the strongest in the world. I mean, I don't know if you remember the 80s as well as I do, but there was this sense of Japan as the most powerful economic. Yeah, definitely. You saw a little bit of it in Blade Runner, but Japan was the economic future of the world. That's
I mean, all the brands were fucking all the electronics was,
exactly
was Asian.
Yeah,
and gadgetry was the thing,
Mm-hmm. Well, the weird thing is that we watched this movie having lived through that experience, an experience 20 years after the making and distribution of this film. You have to look at it at the time of Japan trying to figure out an uncertain future. And so a lot of that plays into this character of these executives who are slimy. But that's business. And a noble character that finds himself in a type of Sophie's Choice moment or a type of there's no way of getting out of this. There's no choice that I can make that doesn't jeopardize my family. But it's really interesting that the character does what he has to do in order to preserve his own humanity. It is the right thing to do ultimately. I think it is the right thing to do, and I think it's a natural way. If the character, if the Mifune character had been set up to be in line with the other executives, to be in agreement with their ideas behind a shoddy product that they could sell at a higher price and make more money, then it wouldn't have been as easy to accept the direction that the story goes in as far as his choices. If he had been, yeah, we should make a shoddier product for a lot less money, maximize profits, and then he went and did what he was still planning to do, which was gain control of the company and fuck those guys, you would not be able to. It'd be incredibly difficult to believe in the goodness of this man. But because he wants
you wouldn't have a movie.
You wouldn't have a movie. No, you wouldn't have a movie. But some filmmakers could have made that character and shown him the light. He had an experience. The love of a good woman drove him. No, none of that shit is what this character is. This character makes the choice. He jeopardizes everything because he knows in his heart that he would not be able to live with himself if he allowed this kid to die. it's a, you know what, in the filmography of Kurosawa, and we're reaching the late middle period of Kurosawa's career. After this, he would do Redbeard, and then I think either right before Redbeard or right after Redbeard, he would be fired from Tora Tora Tora, depending on the story that you hear from that. So he would form much the same way Bogdanovich, Friedkin, and I'm not sure what the other director. Maybe it wasn't Coppola. It was somebody else. They formed an alliance and they tried to create the filmmakers company or something like that. And I think Bogdanovich's film tanked, Sorcerer tanked, and that fell apart. Kurosawa tried to form a similar thing before that with I can't remember the three directors that it was, but that fell apart with his next film after Redbeard, The Descadent. Then I think he attempted suicide. And then there was a period of time where he struggled to get any kind of financing. He ended up making Derso Zula with Russian money, Serbian, Russian, very good film, very interesting film. And then Lucas and Coppola would come to the rescue with funding for Kagemusha, which led to Ron, which led to this late period Kurosawa renaissance with Dreams, Rhapsody in August. I think he did one other film, and then he ended with Maradayo. And I remember seeing, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I've mentioned it on the podcast in the past, where I saw Maradayo in an LA screening about 5 years after 5 years after it played in Japan. I saw it at the New Beverly, and it was a touching film. It was a very moving film about a professor growing old and his students coming back to profess their love for him and his importance in their life. And it was in no way a classic Kurosawa on the level of Seven Samurai or The Hidden Fortress, Yojimbo, or this film, or any of those. But it was the summation of a career. And in the same way that you and I talked about Killers of the Flower Moon a couple of weeks back, the understanding and the knowledge that this could be it. And with Maradayo, I knew that was it. It was an emotional experience. But what's great for someone like you and someone like me, especially for you, you have this opportunity to go back to films that you've either never seen or have an only slight memory of. You have the opportunity to go back into filmmakers that maybe you didn't know anything about and embrace their filmography. And, I don't know if you had seen Sorcerer before we talked about it on our episode. I can't remember. I hadn't. That was a miracle of a movie watching experience for me. I loved it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a long diatribe of me talking about my love for certain filmmakers and the chance to see things that weren't necessarily available to me at a certain point. I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to see this film, and I don't know if you look at it as a masterpiece. I don't know if you look at it on the same level as, well, it's definitely not Seven Samurai, but it's definitely up there with Yojimbo and The Hidden Fortress. And it's I think what's great about what we're doing today is we're shining a light on a film that if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're not familiar with. and maybe something in what we said, hopefully, and I think this is something that we try to do, at least what I try to do every episode, not overextend my excitement for a movie, because I don't want you to go into it with a certain unrealistic expectation. But I want you to know exactly how important certain films are and how good they can be to you if you're open to the movie watching experience. There's a lot here in this film to unpack. It's a beautifully structured film. That first 50 minutes, yes, it's a play, but it rewards so much on second and third and fourth viewings. So by the time you do get to that chase through, not even a chase, a slow walk chase through the red light district, the drug district, the bars, and I'm imagining that it's near a naval base, because you see a lot of Americans in the shot. And that's another aspect that's important in this film, that American occupation of Japan after the war, and the American influence there. I just love how Kurosawa puts it in your face so matter of fact, and is able to use that tension to really sell his story. I was really nervous watching this movie again, and I've seen it. I know how it's going to play out. I know how it's going to end. And there's something about taking your time and not rushing something that makes the tension even greater. Because
definitely.
Because if they were making this film today, that entire final session, that entire final section, from the time the cops start following him into Yokohama, into the bars and everything, that shit would have been cut in half. That's easily 25, 30 minutes.
They could say, this is a fucking montage. You don't need all these things.
Yeah, you don't need this. Cut this down to 12 minutes. Let's get these motherfuckers out of the theater, and then we can get another screening in. There's no respect for the nuance of what long filmmaking can be, of what the shot can be in order to serve the movie. And it's important in this film. And that confrontation... What were you going to say?
What confrontation?
The moment where the kidnapper, what's his name? Ginjiro Takeuchi, sees Gondo walking through the streets, looking into the windows, thinking about his future. The studios would have wanted that to be a bigger moment.
Right, yeah.
And I love that moment because it's so beautifully underplayed. You see it from the perspective of the inspector, the bosun, the detectives as they watch, helpless, knowing the danger that Gondo is in. And it's a throwaway because he just wants to go over there and be in his face. He's playing God at that moment. I am the one who has done this to you. I am the one.
And you have no fucking idea.
And you have no idea. And
yeah, they would have. Yes,
yeah.
They would have really they would have played the fuck out of that up.
Yeah.
Just like the moment where he gets the one junkie woman.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, well, what is this? Who is she? What do they have? What's the relationship there? Is she random? Is it his mom? You know what I mean? Like, it could have been any number of things. And then you find out, well, her bad luck. He's just going to test this. He's going to test this batch on her.
Yeah.
And it's when you start asking questions is when you're getting somewhere. If you're giving the answers and you're right, then it's kind of like, well, it's kind of standard fare. If you're asking questions, and I mean, obviously, you can ask any number of questions, and maybe one of them is that correct outcome. But you're seeing, it's like a choose your own adventure book. Remember those?
I remember those. Yeah.
Choose your own adventure books. I used to love those, and I would go back and go through every variation, every outcome, every possibility, every street that you can take. This is definitely one of those movies where it's just kind of like, it just really illustrates how it's all about choices, the choices that the writer is making, the choices that the filmmaker is making, the choices that the editor is making, the choices that the actor is making, the choices that the character is making, the choices that the other characters are making, and then the choices that you're making as you're watching the film. Because it's, if you're actively engaged in watching it, it's refreshing to have those kind of experiences.
Yeah.
So this was definitely it was a win for me.
I'm really glad, because I'm always nervous about recommending a film to somebody, especially something that I love, because I don't want to waste anybody's time. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not only that. It's like, for example, for me, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, well, what's the reason why Rick's gonna hate this movie?
Yeah.
Because I think if I recommend a film to you, if it's something that you're not already aware of, most likely you're going to hate
it. I've been thinking about that sometimes, but not always. I think you'd be surprised sometimes.
I have, but I just think it's because it's already probably coming from that place of like it's already not going to appeal to the movie watcher place that you want to be in, which is to have an empathy for the character. It already is going to come in with too much distance, too much self-awareness as an art film.
Well, it comes down to a lot of things. It's like watching something and saying, okay, is this innovative in any way? Is this how well is the story told? Is there, when you look at something like, what was it, Suspiria?
Suspiria.
Yeah.
Suspiria.
Part of it is, and this is my fault, is falling into the reputation of a film. Going in expecting more than a film might be capable of delivering. Now, that's my fault. But
which is kind of what you're saying. You're like, you don't want to hype shit up because the hype will fuck it up or something else.
Hype will fuck things up because, and I don't want that. And it's like, I can speak glowingly about this film and I can tell you what I love about it, but that's not necessarily going to be something that's going to resonate with you. I understand that. I respect that. But I don't want to waste your time, especially with a fucking movie that's like 2.5 hours. And this is a very slow movie for a lot of people. A lot of people can't get past that first hour.
Yeah. That's another fucking issue. You know what I mean? Like, is that's where, but they wouldn't get past the fucking, people would have a hard time watching this, but then they could turn around and watch.
Yeah.
And binge watch all fucking weekend.
And Scorsese threw that out at people. It's like, don't tell me that you can't watch a 3.5 hour movie, but you can binge watch a season of an HBO series.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of that.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. I still think
there's going to
he
be
should
that.
have put an intermission and let me take a piss. But other than that, yeah, I agree.
I mean, there's going to be that where if you're not by yourself, you're on the couch or wherever the fuck, and you're like, do you have one more in you?
Yeah.
We have to be at work at this time. We have to get up at this time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, it's
I
not like we can fucking turn on HBO tomorrow.
no.
Like, no, we have to watch it now. And there you go. Another fucking 45 minutes in.
Well, I think this one is worth it. And I think for the people who love movies, and I think for the people who understand what movies are, I think for the people who understand that movies are a particular art form, I think the reward is easy to see. I think it's very easy to understand what you're going to walk away with. And it's almost as if, and this is not Kurosawa doing this, but it's us watching this movie. Is if you've watched Kurosawa, most likely you know the samurai films. Watching this is like throwing a curveball to yourself. You're taking in something different than what you come to expect from somebody. This is a great film to start. Yeah.
And because it's a different genre,
Yeah.
it's going to have different different ways of going through that story.
Yeah. But if you go with this film,
it's a different rhythm.
Yeah. If you go with this film, then you can go to Stray Dog. You can go to Drunken Angel, Ikiru. You can go into the later films, Maradayo. You can... Sometimes it's important to ease yourself into a filmmaker. You have to prepare yourself for what the filmmaker is capable of. And you have to be in the right place. I think this is a film that sets that up. Go see The Bad Sleep Well. Go see Ikiru. Go see these other films that really speak to a different type of humanity than you see in the samurai films. This is a wonderful film. This is an incredibly well-made film. One of the great Mifune performances, Tatsuya Nakadai, is great. And if you know Kurosawa cinema, you will see a whole host of people that have populated his films throughout his career. You'll see all kinds of different characters, from The Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, Throne of Blood. You'll see a lot of different actors. Yojimbo, they're there, and it's great. It's a who's who. So I can't recommend this movie enough. I think it's outside of Seven Samurai, it's my favorite of all of his films. I think it's an incredible achievement. And I have no reservations about recommending it. That being said, I'm just glad that I'm glad that you liked it as much as you did. I hope that we can continue surprising each other with great films that maybe we don't know. So that being said, thank you to Mr. Burroughs. Thank you to Mr. Salcedo. And for those of you who want to contribute, for those of you who listen to what we do and feel that you take something from it, please donate. buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. The holidays are coming up and we can use it. So thank you very much.